Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right,
Yeah.
so last week we began our section on Guthrie's God, the Creator and Creation, and the doctrine of human beings. Who are we? Question that humanity has been asking probably since we've been scribbling on the walls of caves. So last week we talked about creatures that are made in the image of God, and then I think last week we talked about rationality, the soul, and I think this week we are beginning with moral capacity. Is that correct? I think that's where we
Patty's
are.
not here.
Patty's not here to let us know where we are,
Well, I checked off C.
so that's probably where we are?
Yeah.
Okay. So, moral capacity. Does being moral work? So, according to Guthrie, still another possibility is to identify the distinctive character of a human being, and thus what makes a human being like God, as the human capacity to make moral judgments and the freedom to live by them. Sometimes this is the interpretation given to the statements in Reformed confessions. That identity, the image of God, with the godlike righteousness or holiness human beings originally possessed. So we think about the creation. We will have to return presently to what this original righteousness does mean. Now, it's important to say that in the Bible, it does not refer to an independent moral capacity of human beings to know right and wrong and act accordingly. On the contrary, the first human beings were forbidden to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It is a temptation of Satan and rebellion against God to desire to be good and to know good for ourselves. To want righteousness of one's own is to be ignorant of the true righteousness that comes from God. Like Paul, when he was still the persecutor of the church and of Christ himself, one can be blameless under the law and still be the enemy of God. The legally moral person is not necessarily genuinely human and godlike. Sometimes it is just the most moral people who are the most inhumanly unforgiving, unloving, insensitive to the needs of others, and unwilling or unable to let themselves be loved and forgiven. To be a morally responsible agent does not in itself make a person to be truly human, to be a truly human person in the image of God. So, we say, well, maybe it is, the fact that we do have the capacity to be moral. And so Guthrie kind of builds this argument up saying that, well, perhaps, and then like towards the end of his paragraph, the roller coaster then starts plummeting and says, some of these individuals can be some of the worst people, right? This morally, or this feeling of superiority. And then we get this move from being righteous. What was a term that Jesus used a lot, using that term righteous? He put a word in front of it, and it's self-righteous, which kind of alters the meaning of the word. But it kind of alters the meaning of the word in a kind of, yes, very sarcastic way. It's almost like passive-aggressive in ways, saying you're self-righteous. What you're doing is damaging. You think you're righteous, but in reality, you're not. And then, of course, as Jesus' adversaries, they would constantly go back and forth. Insults like whitewashed sepulchres. I mean, he spared nothing on the creative side. Jesus did.
So whitewashed sepulchre, what is that?
Well, think of a sepulchre, which is a sepulchre, right? A tomb, a sarcophagus, perhaps. Good morning. And a whitewash is a type of paint, right? We think of Tom Sawyer, right, was whitewashing the fence, right? I don't even think it was called paint. I think it was whitewash.
Whitewash.
Yeah, so
it's a lime
it's just like like that white lime. Yeah.
covers up a
Dirt.
bunch of dirt and other stuff.
Yeah, it's a cheap, good. It's like primer paint.
We used to use it in the dairy barn.
Yeah, and so a whitewashed sepulcher, you can clean a sepulcher, you can make it look pretty on the outside, but what's on the inside?
Right.
A rotting corpse.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's like when you call someone a whitewashed sepulcher, it's like, well, you look nice on the outside, but on the inside,
I see you, yeah.
yeah, I know what's on your insides, and it's not pretty. Yeah, so Jesus actually came up with some pretty good insults, actually. I mean, and he did, and
That would be a nice sermon.
whitewashed sepulcher is
Nice sermon series.
the good sermon series. Yeah, that's up there with Jesus's imperative statements and Jesus's insults to the.
I think what his disciples would think is like, oh my God, why did you say that?
Yeah, they're only going to come at you harder now.
From something like, really, did you just say that? I mean, they're going to kill you.
Yeah, they're going to get even more angry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
It must have
always.
been really stressful at
Cuss
at
like Jesus.
certain times.
He does. It does. I can't imagine, and it always interests me when you look at the trials when Jesus is put on trial to be crucified, and he goes back and forth between Pilate and the religious leaders, and when he's in front of Pilate, he's not subdued, but he kind of gives him. It's just very closed questions like yes, no, He talks to him a little bit. You wouldn't have the power if my dad didn't give it to you, kind of thing. Then when he gets in front of Annas and Caiaphas, it's like, ba-boom. I mean, he comes at them because they are his people, right? He considers Pilate to be ignorant in these matters. You are part of these absentee landlords. You do not know our ways, and so I chalk it up to ignorance for you. But when he gets in front of his own people, I mean, he lets them have it. His adversaries, he lets them have it. When you think about how Jesus interacts between the woman at the well and Nicodemus, he's not harsh on Nicodemus, but he's more almost like a stern teacher or a stern professor with Nicodemus than he is with the woman at the well. Because why would the woman at the well know these things? She wouldn't. She's not Jewish.
People that are supposed to be teachers are held to a higher standard.
Higher standard. And he also holds his own people to a higher standard because according to Jesus, they should know this. You should know better. How many years have we had this? How many years have we had these revelations by God? Through prophets and through the law, through the scriptures. And so, when you think about that, this self-righteousness, Jesus, that seems to be like a short fuse for him. And he really, he comes at it. Yeah, you talk about the disciples, you think about like when he cleanses the temple. And you have all these people from Jerusalem who are aghast at this. And you can almost sense the disciples saying, yeah, this is Jesus, this is who we've been with for 3 years. Like, they know him, then it's almost like they could be sitting back just shaking their heads like, yeah, this is what you wanted. We've been spending time with this for 3 years. They're used to how he acts. We get this idea, and, Peter Marshall used to preach on this occasionally, that, we get this idea of this wafy Jesus, just kind of, barely moving through the countrysides because he's, so weak looking from our paintings. But he's not. He wasn't like that, he grew up the son of a carpenter, right? He's not. And Jesus came at his adversaries. He was not a pushover, so if someone, challenged him, he would not back down. And I'm not saying he was not a violent man, but he's not the type of person that backed down if someone came at him as an adversary. And so, we have to get this idea of this wafy Jesus out of our minds. He wasn't, So when we think about moral capacity, yes, we do have the ability, but even Guthrie says, where does it say in the Bible that we do have that ability? To figure out right and wrong, and he says even God in the beginning, in the creation myth, he said, no, don't touch that tree, limits. Boundaries. From page 2? Boundaries. Don't touch that tree. You can have anything. It's almost like, it's human nature. If you tell someone, do this, but do not touch that, you're almost certain that individual is going to make a play for what you tell them not to do.
Forbidden fruit.
It's forbidden. You're right. You create a forbidden fruit, right? And so, you know they're going for that fruit.
Yep.
You know it.
2-year-old kids.
2-year-old kids, yes, I know. Yeah, right. Don't
Yeah,
touch
yeah.
this, it's hot. Yeah, so they're not gonna learn until they touch it, hopefully once. So, yeah, so according to Guthrie, when it comes to moral capacity, this is not something that equates us or is where we say we're made in the image of God. Guthrie would say moral capacity is probably not it. Because when we try to do it, we go overboard, right? And this is where we think someone becomes overly pious, right? So it's not just going back and looking at Pharisees and scribes in Jesus' day. You don't have to. Just look at our own times. There's plenty who get on this high horse. Plenty, who climb up on towers and love to look down upon others. And so that's the same. That's it. That's self-righteousness is self-righteousness, right? We were never called to be judges. Thank
But
God.
people love to do that.
And people love to do it. I don't want that job. That's God's job. I don't understand how people would want to apply for that job. It's a hard
they're
job.
going to hell. So.
We're in.
That's right. And that's what looking at the church as a country club is all about. And that's where we get that type of terminology, that type of illustration. It's not a country club. We don't get to judge who's in and who's out.
It's a safari.
But that
It's
could,
more of a safari.
that could improve our financial standing if we had a
It could improve our financial
financial
standing.
standing.
Nice swimming pool back here.
That's right. That's right.
$600 a
No,
year.
the golf course.
Well, the problem is that there's a church on every corner, and that's just the way it is. I know my relatives who are Jewish and live in Atlanta, they in many synagogues, you pay a membership, and they look at your taxes, and this is what
Assessment,
they
yeah.
assess. This is what you pay if you
Wow.
want to be a member, and I'm like, wow, that would be great if we could do that in the Presbyterian church. But then they're like, nah, no thanks, I'll go to the Methodist church down the block.
Right.
Subsidized membership.
The church I belonged to
Yeah.
in Connecticut was an old New England church, the last church.
Yeah,
I think the church was built in like 1794 or something like that.
Wow.
It was an old white wood building, and the pews had doors, and they were numbered.
they used to have pew rentals, I bet.
You would lease your pew.
You would
Really?
lease your-
For the
yeah,
Yeah.
pew
Even
rentals.
when you were there, I mean, even that
No,
day.
no,
No,
that,
no.
that
Okay, yeah.
was gone by the
Okay,
wayside.
very
That was
old.
part of the history of the
Yes,
church.
most definitely. Most definitely.
We
That's
still
an
have the
old
evidence
tradition.
of it there.
Interesting.
Yeah, with the doors on it. That's right. That'd be an amazing church to
We
see.
had this very nice couple here with their kids, and they went to Walla Walla, Washington, and they went to Presbyterian church, and they sat in the pew. It was the first time they were here in Bern, remember, Ali? And they sat there, and very happy to be in church. And this couple comes in there. Get out of here! This is our pew.
That's a pastor's nightmare.
Exactly. Then they come somewhere else. That was it.
That's a pastor's
That's a good way to
nightmare.
drive people
That's
away.
That's a nightmare. Please sit somewhere else just one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just let the air out of their tires.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't confront them in church.
Yes, it's harsh. That happened when I was in my intern. It was my last Sunday before I was going back to seminary. And so a bunch of students, because I did campus ministry, came to send me off. And the students sat in someone's pew.
Oh.
It was a big downtown church. And it was one individual, and it was a lovable church. This was not a regular thing. I mean, it was the first time I've heard, and the senior pastor heard, and he did a newsletter article about that. I was so proud of him.
Yeah.
I was so proud of him. It was, and it wasn't mean, but it was stern.
Yeah.
And it just says, you don't own pews. No one owns pews. They belong to the church. You sit somewhere else. Be happy you have a guest.
Yeah.
That's
Hospitality. How
yeah,
about that?
yeah. But and it's an odd thing. we like comfort. I mean, before I became a minister at my home church, I sat in the same pew. In fact, when I would sit in the pew, if I didn't have the right angle, I would move a little right, move a little left.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Peter. You know, Peter was my minister. It's like, okay,
That's OCD.
That's it. That's part of my OCD.
Mine too.
You know, I had to get Peter in the right lineup. There he is. Now worship can begin.
Yeah.
I'm in the right place. So yeah, I mean, we are creatures of habits. I get it, but we must be careful. We must be careful. So, being moral, it's important to be moral, but Guthrie would say, I don't think that's it. When we say we're created in the likeness of God. So, D, power and dominion. Right. So when we think about power and dominion, we have to go all the way back to what?
Genesis.
Genesis. Excellent, Don. We have to go back to Genesis because what happens in Genesis?
God
God
gives
creates
Adam
humankind and says you're in charge of the earth.
Yeah.
The Big Bang.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Big Bang. You have to go a little bit
That was
further
a
from the
few
Big
billion
Bang.
years ago.
I don't think Adam and Eve were around at that time. So yes, they were given stewardship over the earth, right? So power and dominion over everything that creepy crawls. I love the language in Genesis, creepy crawlies. I mean, like, it's great. It's fantastic. It's just neat. It's how I think about bugs when I see them. Like creepy crawlies in the bathroom or in the man cave. So a very modern and very ancient interpretation holds that it is will to power that is the most essential characteristic of human beings, and that makes them godlike. Their ability to exercise dominion and power over other creatures, right? And Don brought up the whole thing with Genesis, right? So the commandment that human beings created in God's image should subdue the earth and have dominion over all the other creatures, Genesis 1:28. The relation between all individuals and groups is understood as the assertion of power of superiors over inferiors. This is a fatal misunderstanding both of God's power and of the power that God gives human beings created in God's image. God exercises divine power not to dominate and control, but to protect, help, and defend all of God's creatures. If this would be it, if power and dominion would be it, would Jesus get on that soapbox so many times about the least of these
Right.
and the most vulnerable within his society?
Yeah, he told them, you're here to serve, not to be served.
Ah, exactly.
He washed
Right.
their feet to illustrate it.
That's right. I mean, even think when Peter, and originally Peter was aghast at this. Oh my gosh, you can't wash my feet.
Right.
I should be washing your feet, right? And it's, no, if you are to follow, I must wash your feet. And it's a teaching moment. You know, it wasn't that Jesus, the physical act of Jesus just one time washing their feet. It's Jesus washing their feet so they understand that they must do the same and continue to do the same. That they must serve with the servant's heart and not to want to be served themselves. Right? And so this idea of power and dominion making us godlike, maybe if your God is Zeus, maybe if your God is Jupiter or, Odin, some of these mythological gods that did rule with power and fear, and the crops are growing, oh, the gods are happy. The crops are dead, you really made them mad. I mean, so this concept might work with them, but it really doesn't work with our understanding of God, because God doesn't work with that understanding. Jesus smashes that throughout his ministry. I mean, literally smashes that. Anytime he talks about the least of these, anytime he talks about the most vulnerable within society, when he gives the Beatitudes, I mean, if that's not the smoking gun, I don't know what is. It's this reversal of human concepts, of human thoughts, of what gives someone power, of why, of how life is, right? That might does not equate might.
Responsibility.
What's that?
Responsibility.
It's
responsible.
responsibility. It's a reversal. It's a reversal. And Jesus continually does this. It's a reversal. So power and dominion, I think Guthrie kind of tosses that one out right away. So we get to E, and this is where Guthrie drops a biblical understanding. So, we have a small paragraph here. A biblical understanding, Guthrie says. Suppose we gave up the attempt to tell ourselves what it means to be human beings in the image of God by analyzing ourselves and identifying it with this or that capacity, quality, or endowment we find in ourselves. Suppose we remembered that what we find when we analyze ourselves is not the human beings God created us to be, but sinful human beings for whom rationality, spirituality, moral consciousness, power, or other characteristics of the human species become instruments for our self-contradictory, self-destructive refusal and inability to be what God created us to be. Suppose that instead of interpreting what Scripture says about our creation in the image of God to confirm the self-understanding we already have, we read the Bible to give us a new self-understanding. What would a genuinely biblical understanding of human life in the image of God look like? Right? So Guthrie just comes out and smashes all of these things. Right? So to begin, we look at, one, Jesus as true human being in God's image. If we ever want to say what should humanity look like, where do we go? Jesus of Nazareth. That's correct. That's it. That is our only example of what a human being should be and should look like. Not his physical appearance, but his actions, his words, what drives him. That's where we go. That's where we...
Wait, WWJD.
What's that?
What would Jesus do?
Oh, what would...
WWJD.
Yeah, what would Jesus do?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that one a lot better than what would Jesus say. Yeah. What would Jesus do?
Yeah.
So where is it? This always, it's very, very intriguing to me.
Mm.
How, because Jesus' ministry was so inclusive. I mean, revolutionary
Yeah.
in a way, inclusive, that inclusiveness of his ministry.
Right.
But very, very quickly, just listening to Peter and Paul, and how they argue. There is Paul trying to include everyone, and there is Peter saying,
Mm.
this is a Jewish movement. It's like,
Right.
very quickly it becomes exclusive more than inclusive.
It
And I
does.
think we continue, like we're in, they're out. It continues to have that taste of exclusiveness, and that's why so many people are so turned off.
But Peter got turned around when he was told to go visit that Gentile.
Yeah, but you know what? Paul left, and he said, you know what? You stay here, and I'm going to go, and I will
True.
honor your, I will come back and report to you, but I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's their human nature. They were just humans like us,
Yeah.
but we continue to have that exclusive
Oh, most definitely.
tendency.
Yeah.
It's just very
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, and the sad thing is the teachings are still here. It's not like they disappeared when Jesus
But what do
ascended.
we do? We
That's
take
right.
the teachings and say, but this is where it says, they're out. They're out.
Right.
It says it here. They take that line,
Yeah. Yeah.
that serves them, and then
Yeah.
all the other places where Jesus goes to the untouchables, when he touches the unclean, nothing.
When he eats with the
Nothing.
tax
They're
collectors,
out. Yeah.
when he spends time with prostitutes, when he is with the leprous and the broken in spirit, and he spends time with these individuals, and he loves them and treats them like individuals and not numbers.
And invites himself to their homes.
Yeah.
And the Syrophoenician lady. I like
The
that.
Syrophoenician,
This one really
one of
counts.
my favorite. Syrophoenician woman.
Steps back.
Well, and it even shows that even Jesus had to combat,
Yeah.
this concept
Provincial.
that has been passed through his people, that this woman is a Gentile. He calls her a dog.
Mhm.
There's no, that's what we call a problematic text.
Yep.
It's a problematic text, I know lots of people who try to clean it up and polish it pretty, but I mean, it is what it is. But this is not, but she doesn't give up. She's persistent. This woman knows the relationship between Jews and Gentiles, but she keeps persisting. Yeah, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table, and anyone who has dogs or had a dog in their life know that to be true. It makes sense. And, he didn't call her a mangy wild beast that roams the wilderness. The dog, it's more like a pet, because Gentiles had dogs. Gentiles kept dogs. The ancient Jews pretty much did not. So, Gentiles kept dogs. So that kind of a slide would be understood by her. But, she didn't back down. She didn't back down. So, and the difficult thing is, Jesus is here with his disciples, and he's always able to rebuke when they have a wrong thought, or he's able to correct it. Oh, how long have you been with me? Come on, it's like, straighten up. No, we don't do like this. But when he's gone, they're left on their own, right? And that's where we see things break down at points. And it just shows, just because they're filled with the Holy Spirit doesn't make them gods, right? So yeah, they are going to slip up. Yeah, Peter, one of my professors used to explain it like, when Peter first began his ministry, he'd be out there eating ham sandwiches with the Gentiles, and when the Jewish council came around, he kind of stuffed that ham sandwich in the potted plant behind him. No, what are you talking about? Because how hard is it to erase centuries of thought? That you don't mix. You don't mix with the Gentiles, right? God had to provide creative ways to help convince Peter. Otherwise, right? When you think about the blanket that kind of descended from heaven with all the different foods on it, he wasn't saying, go to the Golden Corral. He was saying, look, and Peter saying, whoa, there's some unclean things on that thing. And Jesus saying, everything I make is clean. It's all good.
It's not what you put in is what comes out.
It's what, that's not what you put in your mouth. It's what comes out of your mouth that makes you unclean. Beautiful. Fantastic. So Peter needs that nudge. Paul is, in many ways, I don't want to say the perfect, because he's not, but Paul is a good candidate to go to the Gentiles, because Paul is used to dealing with Gentiles, right? Yeah. Not just that he deals with Gentiles, but he understands how they work. He is friendly with them. You wouldn't be a Roman citizen if you detested Gentiles. It wouldn't be like, well, let me just get this passport, this citizenship, so I could be around all these people who I detest every day. No, he understood. Paul was definitely much more worldly than any of the disciples, or all of them rolled into one. So he's able to do this. And yet Paul had his own shortcomings. I mean, none of them were perfect. But Paul had, I think, a greater vision when it came to the growth of the church, which was not limited to keeping it Jewish. Because there's a whole lot more Gentiles than there are Jews. You tell people, look at a map, and that little dot on the map, which is, or in the ancient world, which was Judea, right, the Roman province of Judea. And then you see everything else, well, that's Gentile. It's like everything else, So it's one dot compared to everything else. So, you don't have to be a mathlete to figure out that it's only going to take, it's a matter of a short matter of time before this does this. And that's exactly what happens. So the people in the Jerusalem council were, their fears, they're justified. I mean, they're correct. Now, the fear of, the church becoming more Gentile, you can say, well, that's, that shouldn't be. But their fear that it was going to happen is correct. I mean, they knew it. They saw the writing on the wall. And that's what they fought to hold on to. And it was futile. You couldn't. It's a matter of numbers. And the church has never looked the same. No matter where it moves, it always picks up the flavor, the culture of where it is transmitted to. So it's not just the early church with the Jews, it's us too. It's people from the 20th century. It's people from Europe or Asia or South America or from Africa. It doesn't make a difference where. Everyone is going to get to that point, say, we've always done it like this. We've never done it like that, right? It's not just us. It is what it is. The gospel is not something, it's not a pet. It's not meant to be domesticated and to be neat and tidy. It's meant to go against the grain. It's meant to be radical. It's meant to change lives. It's not meant to be neatly kept on someone's shelf. It's meant to be given away, and it's meant to be dynamic. And that's some things that we miss. So when we think about the true image of what a human should be, it's Jesus. And Alejandro is correct. The further we move away from Jesus, we see how we keep screwing that up. Whether it be Peter or, you can say an Inquisition or the Crusades or the church today saying, you can't come in here because you're not like us. It happens all the time. All the time. There are good, solid reasons why people won't go to church. And I cannot argue with that. They are correct. If people are pushed out, if people are abused, if people are maltreated, why would you want to go back? I get that. I totally understand that. But it means, how do we repair bridges? How do we reach people who have been hurt? And many of these people have been hurt, right? And this is, people in general just don't have bad feelings about an organization that did nothing to them. Something had to have happened for that to happen. And I come into contact with people who have been burned by the church, and I'm talking about from teenagers to people in their 90s.
Yeah.
And that's no joke. That's no joke. And they could be conservatives or they could be liberals. It doesn't make a difference. People have been burned all across the board.
I hear that a lot at the hospital.
Yeah?
Yes,
Yeah.
they have a church and they'll tell you why.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, they'll tell you.
It's very painful when people tell you this.
It is.
I don't know how you feel, but you're
Especially
like,
if
Yes.
you're sick.
Some of them are just
Exactly.
rationalizing, but some of them have real
Sure.
it's very
valid
painful.
reasons.
That's right. It is very painful. And we should take it personally. Because
It hurts.
we
It's
represent
like
the church.
they're talking about your parents.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that.
Sure. It should
I
sting.
mean, it's true, but
It
that's
is.
not that. You
Yeah.
understand where they're coming from.
You
but
do.
It hurts.
You do. And, and I say that we should allow it to sting us, not because, we should, be self-loathing, but it's to help us make corrections on our own. How could we avoid
Right,
this?
how do we change our church?
Exactly. How do we become more welcoming?
We're not
How
turning
can
people
we
away.
avoid situations like this? And like Don said, and like Alejandra said, this is not just like a couple isolated events. There are people all over the
For sure,
place.
you know.
They're all over the place. So,
And all over the world.
Oh,
When
yeah.
I go to Colombia, you hear it over and over, regardless of their culture or their
yeah,
Yeah,
level of education. It's everywhere.
it's everywhere. And so when we think about it, when we say, you've got generations now, like this challenge for the church now, not this, but I mean the church in whole, is, with partly is the millennial groups. And it doesn't end with the millennials, because you got another generation coming right behind them. Then you have my son's generation coming behind that. And we don't even know what their characteristics are yet. But we know that there are generations who say, well, the church has done some bad things. And as a minister, I can't argue with that. They are correct. They are correct. And the emphasis, they don't have to do anything. It's the church's responsibility to mend it, right? So we are the ones who have to figure out, well, how do we do this? How do we make right? Because you can't just say, well, that's fine, they don't want to come to church, well, so be it. Well, the church doors won't be open much longer, right? Because each generation will eventually pass on, right? And so it is our job. We are the ones representing the church, So Jesus doesn't say, we just can't give up. We can't give up. I mean, and so when we think about Jesus as being the true example of what being human is all about, this is gold. This is golden. We think about what Paul said, I imitate Christ. So imitate me. Which was great. I love that line. Thomas à Kempis, his works, right? The imitation of Christ. If you want to know, this is the way to go. Imitate the life of Christ and you're golden. That's it, right? So when we think about Jesus coming to earth, right, to be incarnate, it's not just about salvation. It's a big part of it, but it's not all. The other half is Jesus teaches us how to be human.
Right. Sets an example.
That's it. If it's all about salvation, why would Jesus would have just came, waited for that year 33, came, insulted some leaders, and been nailed to a cross. And that's it. But it's not. He has 3 years where he ministers to people, gets to know people on an incredibly close level, and he teaches. Why the teaching if it's not important? It's so important, right? Because this is where we learn how to be a human being.
I wish he had started earlier.
I do too. I do too. Every time you read John,
His time had not yet come.
yes, right.
Woman?
That's right. That's right.
Woman,
What is that to me? Right. What is that to me?
If it wasn't for Mary, it would have been
That's
even
right.
later, apparently.
That's right. That's right. Go down to Big Red and pick up some more wine. Yes. And so when we think about that, so Jesus is the true being in God's image. So that's it. So if we want to know what it means to be made in God's image as a human, we must look to the human side of Jesus of Nazareth. And that's our answer. It's no secret. Now, easier said than done. Yeah, because it's not easy. It's not easy to put you aside for everyone else, because that's kind of what he did. That's kind of what he did. All right, next week we'll pick up with Adam and Eve or Christ. Where do we see true humanity? And we'll begin under 1.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're